Hi everyone, it's Ren here. It's good to see you guys. Hope you're having a nice Sunday. Before I start this video, let me just remind you that I have a book out, The Interview, if you're into Kafka, Dostoevsky, Psychological Thinkers, Insights into Human Psychology inspired by Carl Jung. You might be interested, links down below. Thank you for those who have kindly bought the book and left some really good reviews, both on Goodreads and on Amazon. I really appreciate it. You guys seem to be enjoying it, so I'm happy about that. Now, we today are going to be talking about the ENTJ. It's interesting because I have not really ever made a video specifically dedicated to ENTJs, and I think part of the reason could be that I've never really had a lot of requests for it. There are not many ENTJs, I think, in my audience. My audience is primarily, I think, composed of obviously INFJs, INFPs, all the INs really, as well as a number of ENs, especially ENFPs, maybe some ENTPs, and then a number of introverted sensing types too. But there's not a lot of ENTJs as a result. I was never kind of urged to make a video about them, but there have been some requests in the meantime, and I thought it was a good opportunity to fill in the gap. Because the ENTJ is a really interesting type. It's a type that has a certain reputation to start with, so we might first have a look at that kind of reputation and see if that holds against the evidence of what I like to use, which is the function stack. And we'll try to see if it's also backed up by actual experiences of actual people. So, what is the reputation of ENTJs? I think the reputation of ENTJs is that they are, first of all, they are the most successful type, I think, when it comes to careers, when it comes to realizing their ambitions. I've seen a graph showing that, and I don't know how those statistics were gathered. Let's assume for a second that they're correct. In terms of like average income per person, per type, it seems that the ENTJs are kind of topping. They're topping the list, essentially, and the reasons for that, which are usually given, in sort of common literature on the topic, is that they are very practical and yet forward-looking individuals with a strong sense of pragmatism and realism, and that they are very good at manipulating realities to suit their needs without being too hampered by emotions. It's okay. So if you take that description, it's obvious that it sounds like the perfect recipe to be a successful individual, because you're pragmatic, you're smart, you are big picture as a thinker. You don't get hampered by too many emotions. You take constructive feedback seriously. You have a strong idea of how you can improve, and you can plan for the future, and it comes naturally to kind of lead people as well, which is facilitated by the function stack. So that's the sort of typical picture of the ENTJ. Now, sometimes that image is compounded a little bit by the reputation that ENTJs have for aggression, selfishness, insensitivity. You often hear like the evil ENTJ. Like half of the villains in movies seem to be evil ENTJs. Sometimes they're INTJ villains, depending on whether the movie can actually write a convincing INTJ villain. Because that requires balancing strong introversion against like a higher purpose, which is obviously quite possible. But you have a lot of ENTJ villains in fiction, and so now what I would like to look at is whether any of this is correct, whether the popular view is accurate, and whether there is a foundation also to these sort of darker pictures that are made of ENTJs. So what I would say is the following. I would say that the ENTJ is a potentially socially very powerful type. There's no doubt about it. And I think that you could actually argue that given the nature of their function stack, they are a type which is occasionally in danger of becoming oblivious to um, to the higher good, altruism, to the emotions of other people. And the problem is not just that, but it's if you like, it's made worse by the fact that they are potentially very powerful people in potential anyway. It's not always realized for a multitude of different reasons. Your background is one of them. If you're born into a difficult background, being an ENTJ doesn't mean you're going to become a billionaire. But in potential, they have the potential to be socially powerful and to have influence. Now, the reason why that can be dangerous at times is that the function stack of the ENTJ does not give a lot of access to introspecting on their emotions. As you know, their feeling function is in the 4th slot, so it is their inferior function. And now, if you wanted to reason in terms of the shadow functions, you could also say that their extroverted feeling function is in the 8th slot. So you're not going to see a lot of conscious extroverted feeling on the part of an ENTJ, if at all, which is a very useful way to tell them apart from ENFJs. Sometimes I see that people hesitate between the two, and it's not that difficult to tell them apart, even if there's only a letter in common. ENTJs don't do extroverted feeling very well. And sometimes people who find extroverted feeling quite smothering, or they feel like it demands too much of them, or it makes them feel bad, the typical issues with extroverted feeling. Sometimes they much prefer working with an ENTJ at TDOM because the demands that can be made are not made via feeling. So in general, ENTJs are not prone to making very conscious feeling judgments. And that in itself is not an issue. You see, it's not an issue because, it can be an issue, but it's not necessarily an issue. If the ENTJ is a balanced individual in the first place, if they have grown up within a stable family background, and if they're disposed in such a way that they tend to desire the good and to be altruistic, which is often the case, then the fact that there is not a huge amount of feeling introspection is not necessarily an issue, because oftentimes feeling introspection can be a way for you to redirect your priorities in terms of what you want and in terms of how you relate on a feeling basis to people around you. But it can also be a hindrance to acting like in the outer world to make a real difference. If you spend your entire time, like your stereotype of the FI dominance, you can spend your time thinking about it, being nostalgic about it, writing about it, but never actually leading concrete change. So feeling judgments can come in the way. And never forget that a feeling judgment is not the same as a feeling. And that's something that a lot of people tend to forget. You read way too often that FI is about feelings, that FE is about feelings, difference being between objective and subjective, but actually it's not about feeling, it's about feeling judgments. So it means that in terms of feeling and in terms of the realm of emotion, which is at the basis of feeling, ENTJs and any other type have just as many and as many layered and rich feelings. It's more that they don't have as much access to resorting to the types of judgments which reorganize those feelings. And that can be useful, but if there's too much reorganization, it can also lead to paralysis, okay? And that can happen with FI dominance, for example. Now, with a T dominant like an ENTJ, that's not going to happen. But if the feeling/emotion realm is in need of reorganization, it's going to be difficult for the ENTJ to do it, and especially by themselves. So it's almost as if it's ideal if that can happen via an external agent, the family, having good teachers, having a solid environment which can orient their TE and in a way sometimes take the place of their introverted feeling, which is really quite unconscious. And so, if you like, those are two sides of one coin. dominant, like very strong introverted feeling, yes, like hyper awareness of your feeling world, but a danger to be being exposed to paralysis, and then not a lot of access to it, no access to paralysis. But if you're a little bit askew, well, that might be translated into your domain of actions, your domain of projects that you accomplish with your TENI. And that's when you could end up with unhealthy ENTJ types that can arguably do more social damage simply because they are more equipped to have social clout. Okay, but if you like, this is not dictated by the fact that their feelings are messed up or that they have an absence of feeling. Is that the recalibration that is facilitated by FI is accessible to them only at a reasonably unconscious level. Oftentimes what you'll find is that they can access the realm of introverted feeling by engaging in an aesthetic experience, which is the combination with extroverted sensing, which is their third function. So ENTJs, if you want to access the feelings of an ENTJ, you can often do so via following how they interact with the outside world, whether it be art, whether it be music, whether it be, I have an ENTJ buddy who likes his poetry at times. So that's completely possible, and it's a good way to access the domain of introverted feeling, even if it's indirect. So it's actually quite healthy for an ENTJ to engage their SE and not to have if you like, an underdeveloped SE. Because sometimes some people are a little bit too quick to assume that SE is an issue for the ENTJ because it's going to make their TENI attracted to the idea of amassing wealth at the expense of others, because supposedly extroverted sensing is about valuing material things, which obviously it's not. It can translate into that, but extroverted sensing is a function which allows you to gather data from your sensual experience, from the sensing function, as opposed to the intuitive function. So that in itself does not say anything about whether you're going to be materialistic or not. It's simply how you gather the data, and the more data that you can gather for an ENTJ, the better, because it means that it will provide an indirect gate to the domain of introverted feeling. Now, when you focus on the domain of TENI, which are their dominant functions, really they're not that different from what you would see in an INTJ. I think that's part of the reason why a lot of INTJs wonder if they're ENTJs and vice versa, because ENTJs are not necessarily super extroverted. They tend to be quite extroverted, but they wouldn't be on average as much as an ENFJ is, and their NI can be quite strong. Their NI can be quite strong. It works closely in tandem with their TE, so there can be a bit of confusion somewhere. But the difference, you can usually tell it by the fact that an ENTJ is more talkative than an INTJ. Not necessarily as good listeners on average. I'm not saying all the time. I'm just saying on average. And usually the INTJ is given away, if they're healthy, by the fact that they have quite strong FI, which is not as easily accessible by the ENTJ. So dominant E and accessory NI, wonderful tools for bringing about change. It leads the ENTJs even more so than INTJs to view the world in terms of projects, and that's the T and I combination. It's like TENI makes you project into the future in terms of concrete, practical achievements. And that's embodied in the notion of projects. And you'll often see ENTJs that like to think in terms of projects, which is also why they work well in the corporate world, because that's a world where projects are the norm. And it's almost tempting to think that ENTJs devised that world. Project is a great word because it means projection into the future, but also you need outputs. There's going to be monitoring of what the outputs are going to be, and the ENTJ functions like this. The INTJ does also, but because they're a dominant NI, a bit like the INFJ, sometimes they're happy to see their live projects as this big one thing. The ENTJ might have that too, but it won't make as much sense to them unless they break down that big project into separate little projects that they can move, or long projects that they can move, from one to the other, until they become kings or queens. All right, I hope that was useful. Let me know what you think. Bye bye.